We're getting ready to do an oil change on this 2019 Mustang GT 5.0, and there are a few details that you really need to pay attention to before you get into this project. Unless you have a lift or something like that, or you can competently get this thing up on jacks and properly support it with jack stands that aren't going to collapse on you, a set of ramps like this goes a long way to giving you the clearance you need to get under there. Do not, under any circumstances, depend on the park position on the selector or the parking brake to keep this vehicle from rolling. One critically important piece of equipment to have is a pair of chocks to block those rear wheels so the car cannot move not even an inch. You don't need much of imagination to know what can happen if this thing rolls back off the ramps and you're underneath it. The next item you have to concern yourself with is the proper type of oil to use. Now this says SAE 5W to 20 right here on the fill cap. That being said, we're going to use Pennzoil full synthetic 5W-20 oil. The issue here is that on some Mustang 5.0s you're going to find that the fill cap is going to say 5W30. So you really need to pay close attention to your owner's manual and exactly what it says on that fill cap, because you want to have the right lubricant for that engine. We are assuming that Ford knows what they're doing when they put these fill caps on with the lubricant viscosity labeled right on it. There's also the possibility that when they're putting this engine together, they have two boxes of fill caps, one at 520, the other at 530, and they just pull out whatever one they have, or when they run out of one, they start using the other. We can't speak to that. We have no idea, but we're going to use 5W20 in this particular vehicle. Another minor issue that you may have a slight problem with is the location of the dipstick. Some people don't mind doing a Where's Waldo type of hunt to try to find out where it might be, but we're going to make this easy for you, and we're going to show you exactly where it is. Go to the driver's side of the engine and look down right underneath here, and you can just barely make it out. You might be able to see it better from this angle, and you can see it. That's it right there. You have to reach around the cross support here, and then you can pull that thing right out. Needless to say, knowing where the dipstick is important information, because once we start putting oil in this thing, we're going to use that to measure so we'll get the exact correct quantity in here. We pulled this guy up here about an hour and a half ago, put it up on the ramps, popped the hood. The reason being, we want this engine to cool down a little bit before we start to work. If you don't give the engine a chance to cool off, you're going to find that that oil is not just a little bit hot, but really hot. Even now, after 90 minutes, it's still going to be on the warm side. You need to know the location of two things. Number one is the oil filter, which is right here on the driver's side, pretty much directly under the alternator. You can see it right in there. Apparently Mustang has various configurations, and they all have some type of a shield that's going to be underneath the oil filter. In this particular case, we have a flexible rubber shield right here, and we're going to use a 7mm socket, and we're going to pull this screw out, and that way we can move the shield down and we'll be able to access the oil filter and remove it. The other thing, of course, you need to know is the location of the drain plug, and this is on the back end of the oil pan, and oddly enough, this oil pan is made from plastic, so you really want to be careful when you're playing with this thing. Before you start this job, there are a few things you're going to need to do this successfully and conveniently. First, you need some cardboard or something else that you can put under the vehicle so that A, you have something to lay on, and B, if the oil gets out of control, you'll have something that's going to stop it from soaking into your pavement or whatever. Something else you need to point out here that you will find out once you get into this project, particularly if you have not done it before, is that you need to get your back right on the ground, because there is no room to get a creeper underneath here. We also strongly recommend a drain pan. But you're going to find that since this vehicle holds 10 quarts of oil, that's right, 2 of these big yellow bottles full of oil, you may not have enough capacity in your drain pan. Even if it's big enough, you're going to find that the volume of oil is going to make it very difficult to manage and very difficult to empty when you need to do that. Therefore, we have this extra 5-quart oil container sitting on the side here. And what we're going to do is we're going to put that underneath the spigot right after we open it and try to get 5 quarts of oil into this can. So therefore, we only have to worry about 5 quarts capacity inside our drain pan. You're going to need a ratchet with a 7mm socket to remove that flap that's over the oil filter. But you could also use a 7mm combination wrench and do the job just as well. You don't absolutely need protective gloves, but since this can be a really messy job, you're going to find that they're going to come in to be really convenient and make cleanup a lot easier. Since what can happen will happen, I think we all know that, you should also have a few shop rags, these would be old ones you don't want to use again, and or some paper towels real handy. Finally, since this is an oil change, the one really indispensable tool that you must have is some type of tool for removing the oil filter. When you install a new oil filter, you're going to install it hand tight only. But after that thing's been on the vehicle for 8,000 to 10,000 miles, it's a lot more than hand tight, and you absolutely must have the correct tool to get in there and get it broken free. The tool we're going to use is Tech Team's number 702 drop forged oil filter plier wrenches. What's really nice about these is they have a 20-degree offset, which means I can reach into tight spaces that I would not be able to access if they were just straight. They have comfortable vinyl grips that are also easy to clean up. And I'm going to tell you, you're going to need to clean these up when you're done because you're going to have oil all over them. It has teeth that allow you to positively engage the oil filter and easily remove it, even if it's slippery. You know, we all know that the oil filters come in various sizes and diameters. This has a slip joint type of connection here that allows you to adjust this for various diameter oil filter cartridges. This Tech Team tool will serve you well for almost any kind of oil change on almost any kind of vehicle or piece of equipment or machinery. In order to keep the plug from leaking after an oil change, it's been recommended that after every 3rd or 4th oil change you use a new plug. I suspect that the reason they're worried about leaks is that this O-ring gets compressed, and with the heat and everything else, it loses its ability to make a good seal. Somehow I think that if you were able to get good, new, lively O-rings, that would mean that you don't have to go out and buy a new plug for every 2nd or 3rd oil change. Now we've backed off the one screw that holds this flexible flap over the oil filter, and there are 2 other screws it could pull out and take the whole thing out, but what we decided to do is just take this little spring clamp and clamp it back out of the way, because it's going to do exactly the same thing as if we took the whole thing off. Something you want to do before you actually remove that oil filter is to get a rag or some paper towels up there underneath, because once that thing comes off, you're going to have oil dripping out of it, or maybe even gushing a little bit, and it's going to get all over the wire work and everything else that's underneath it. Using a rag to intercept this oil is going to be a lot more convenient and a lot neater than trying to clean up the mess afterwards. Okay, we've removed our drain plug and the oil came gushing out, and one thing we want to point out is that it comes out hot and fast. The hot part is why we let the engine cool down before we get in there and do the work, because you're going to have to go in there and intercept that oil flow by holding the plug back in place, because it will overwhelm the ability of the drain pan to accumulate all the oil into its reservoir. In other words, if you're not ready to put this plug back in place to intercept that oil flow, it's going to overflow your drain pan and you are going to have one heck of a mess. Alright, we got this guy out and we're examining it and it looks good. We're going to clean it up. We're going to use the same one. One thing you want to pay attention to is that you need to clean out the socket that this screws into. In other words, get your paper towel in there, turn it around, and do a good cleaning to make sure that there's no gunk or debris, because that's what's certainly going to screw up the ability of the O-ring to make a good, secure seal. This vehicle calls for a Napa number 7502. You can see right there, filter, and we're using the gold filter, which is about as good as you can get. And one of the things you want to pay attention to is you want to get some grease and put it around the perimeter, right in the face, all right, of this gasket. Doesn't have to be a lot, but this will just enhance its ability to make a good, secure seal. You'll notice that we still have the filter sitting in the box, because what you want to do is leave that guy in the box so that it's properly supported and oriented, so it's not going around in the dirt, and you'll be able to access this easily. After you've removed your old filter and you've installed the new one, and you've taken out of the box, now you have something that will properly support the used filter, which is going to be filled with oil that's going to run all over the place unless you have some way to properly support it, and then we can just dispose of this environmentally correctly. We've got Tech Team's plier right on there, and we're going to give a little twist, and you see that fits in there just perfectly, and now we can loosen this guy up, and then once we get it broken free, we'll be able to unscrew it by hand. Another thing we feel necessary to point out to make your life easier is that when you're actually unscrewing that oil filter with your hand, do it by reaching over the frame member, because if you reach under the frame member, all the oil is going to run over your hand and down your arm. We pulled the old filter out of there, and you can see here we got it in the box. We just close this up and now we can get rid of it. And we've also installed the new filter hand tight. I mean, good and tight, hand tight, but no tools. Hand tight is more than enough. Now we're going to pull off the filler cap here, and then we're going to put 9 quarts of oil in this. Even though it calls for 10, we're going to put in 9. We're going to run up the engine, and then we're going to pull out the dipstick and start adding additional oil at that point until we get it to the correct fill level. The funnel is going to do a neat, clean job. You, of course, can try to do this without the funnel, but you're probably going to end up with a horrendous mess that you're not going to want to deal with later. Pour your oil slowly and carefully to make sure you don't overflow the funnel, just like this. We put enough oil in there so we can start it up and check for leaks. Now, it's really important, make sure you put that cap in before you start the engine, otherwise you can blow oil out all over the place and make one hell of a mess. We're only going to let it run for about 30-45 seconds, maybe a minute, just long enough to get the oil circulating and get the filter filled and get it into all of the parts of the engine. Then we'll be able to do an accurate measurement to see how much oil we have in there and top it up accordingly. You also notice we still have this thing up on the ramps, and the reason for that is so that I can crawl under there and just double check to make sure we don't have any leaks, and also to put that little flap back in place. We removed our wheel chocks and we pulled this thing down off the ramps. The reason we pulled off the ramps is to get a real accurate measurement on that dipstick. We need the vehicle to be level. You might note that we also had basically no mess. This is the extent of any oil that escaped us. Everything that could have been on the frame was caught by the one rag, and we have everything cleaned up nice and neat. This piece of cardboard, our oily rags, etc., can now be thrown in the trash, and we had a neat job. Okay, pulled the dipstick, and just as I suspected, we're not even close here. We need at least another quart, probably a quart and a half to bring this up. But we want to bring it up gradually, because the worst thing we can do is overfill this. We want that oil fill to be right between these two marks. We are adding our oil a little bit at a time. We're putting just about a half quart in, and we're going to bring this up step by step until we get it right where we want it. It's not necessary to run this again, because this oil is just going down into the crankcase, and that's right where the dipstick goes, so that's where we have to measure it. Okay, now we pulled that dipstick out, and you can see right here that that oil level is just towards the upper mark, which is just about perfect, because that's exactly what we want. As far as this dipstick is concerned, first, when you put it in to measure your oil, make sure it's fully seated, because if it's not fully seated, you're going to be getting a reading that's going to show you need oil when you don't need oil, and you're going to end up overfilling your engine, and that's bad. Another thing with this particular Mustang dipstick on this 5.0 engine is it's directional. In other words, when you try to put it into the socket it goes into, apparently there's a slot down there, and you have to keep rotating it slowly and keep trying to get it to go through that slot. Otherwise, you're going to force it, and you're going to end up bending it, and you're not going to be a happy camper. Well, we got this thing open. It's a good opportunity to top off some of our other fluids, and here we're just putting some windshield washer fluid in here, because
You've been using that a little bit. And it's not a bad idea to fill it up when you get the chance. There you go.
Job's done, and our final step will be to go inside and reset the oil life. However, that's a story for another day.